Imagine this. You've just cooked a massive feast for a special occasion. You've got roasted chicken, a huge pot of stew, loaves of bread, the whole deal. Now, what happens to the leftovers? You might eat them for a day or two, but eventually, a lot of it probably ends up in the trash, right? In the modern world, we waste about a third of all the food we produce. But what if I told you that our medieval ancestors could make a single meal, a single animal, last not for days, but for weeks, even months? It sounds impossible, but for them, it was a matter of survival. Today, we're diving deep into the ingenious and sometimes stomach-churning ways medieval people preserved food and stretched every last calorie. Forget your fridge and freezer. This is preservation, medieval style. Let's start with the heart of many medieval meals: meat. When a peasant family was lucky enough to slaughter a pig, usually once a year in autumn, not a single scrap was wasted. This was their protein for the entire winter. So how did they keep it from going bad? The number one technique was salting. They would encrust every inch of the pork with salt, drawing out the moisture that bacteria need to grow. The meat was then packed into barrels, layered with even more salt. This process, called salt curing, could preserve pork for months. You'd get bacon, ham, and other salted cuts that were incredibly tough and salty by our standards. Before eating it, you'd have to soak it in water for hours, sometimes days, just to make it palatable. But salting wasn't the only trick up their sleeve. Smoking was another huge one. They'd hang strips of meat or whole fish in a special smokehouse, or even just high up in the rafters of their own single-room homes. The constant smoke from the central hearth would slowly dry out the meat and coat it in a layer of antibacterial compounds from the wood smoke. This gave the food a deep, smoky flavor and made it last through the long, cold months. Think of it as the original beef jerky, but on a much larger scale and a lot more essential for survival. Then there was drying. This worked best in drier climates or during the summer months. Fruits, vegetables, herbs, and especially fish were laid out on racks in the sun and wind. Cod, for example, was a staple food across Europe, often caught in the North Atlantic. It was butterflied, salted, and hung on wooden racks to dry until it was hard as a board. This was called stockfish. It was incredibly light, which made it easy to transport inland, and it could last for years. To eat it, you'd have to rehydrate it and then pound it with a mallet to soften it up before cooking it into stews. It might not sound appetizing, but it was a crucial source of protein, especially during Lent, when meat was forbidden. Now, let's talk about something a bit more. Fermented. Pickling wasn't just for cucumbers. People pickled everything: eggs, onions, cabbage, to make sauerkraut, even walnuts. They would submerge foods in a brine of salt and water, or in acidic liquids like vinegar or verjuice, which is the sour juice of unripe grapes. This acidic environment killed off harmful bacteria while allowing beneficial ones to thrive, preserving the food and adding a tangy, complex flavor. And what about dairy? Without refrigeration, milk would spoil in a matter of hours. So they didn't drink much fresh milk unless they were very young or sick. Instead, they immediately turned it into something that would last. Cheese is the most obvious example. Cheesemaking is an ancient form of preservation. By adding rennet, separating the curds from the whey, salting, and aging them, you could turn perishable milk into a hard, nutritious, and long-lasting food source. The harder the cheese, the longer it would last. Think of a big wheel of Parmesan that could be stored for years. Butter was also preserved by clarifying it into ghee, or by churning it with a huge amount of salt. But what about the truly creative, almost desperate methods? This is where things get really interesting. Let's go back to that roasted feast. After the initial meal, the leftover meat would be stripped from the bones. These scraps would then be finely minced and cooked down with spices and fat. This mixture was then packed tightly into a pot and sealed with a thick layer of rendered fat, like lard or butter. This created an airtight seal, preventing oxygen from getting in and spoiling the meat. This is the origin of things like PT and rillettes. It was a way to make the last bits of a roast last for another week or more. And the bones. Oh, the bones were never thrown away. They were the gift that kept on giving. They would be boiled for hours, even days, to create a bone broth. This broth, full of nutrients and gelatin, would become the base for the next week's soups and stews. They would keep a perpetual stew pot simmering over the fire. Every day, they'd take some stew out to eat and add in whatever they had. More water, a few vegetables from the garden, scraps of bread, and of course, those bones. The pot was rarely ever fully emptied, so some of the ingredients in the stew could have been simmering in there for weeks. This continuous cooking process kept the bacteria at bay. Even bread, the staff of life, was made to last. The bread most people ate wasn't the soft, fluffy loaf you buy today. It was often a dense, dark, heavy bread made from rye or barley called maslin. These loaves were baked to be incredibly hard, almost like a rock. This hardness was a feature, not a bug. It meant the bread resisted mold and could be stored for a long time. To eat it, you wouldn't just bite into it. You'd have to break off a chunk and soak it in your soup, stew, or ale to make it soft enough to chew. Stale bread was also ground up to make breadcrumbs, which were used to thicken sauces and stews, ensuring not a single crumb was wasted. So when you look at it all together, you see a system where one meal flows into the next in a continuous cycle. The roast chicken becomes minced meat pies. The carcass becomes broth for a perpetual stew. The stale bread thickens that stew. Every single part of the food was used, reused, and transformed. It was a philosophy born out of necessity. They didn't have the luxury of choice or the convenience of a supermarket. Food was precious, and wasting it was unthinkable. It makes you think twice about that half-eaten container of leftovers sitting in the back of your fridge, doesn't it? These medieval techniques, while sometimes tasting a little intense for our modern palates, were a testament to human ingenuity and our remarkable ability to adapt and survive. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the medieval kitchen fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which preservation method you found the most surprising. See you next time.